The city speaks, rising in a rhythm of rust and rapture, of regret, and the grim, relentless creeping of decay. Graffiti, it seems, is everywhere, imitating and mocking us, hinting at our fears and insecurities, our shadow growing long behind our fleeting footsteps. You might be forgiven for thinking these things are a modern phenomena, something unpleasant to be shunned and avoided. But when I went on a journey in search of graffiti, I uncovered a story of which is ancient and fascinating, taking me to surprising and bizarre environments, and revealing a tale of madness, memory, and mystery. My journey began in the town of Ludlow, nestled at the foot of the Shropshire Hills. A historic market town which is not the kind of place most would associate with street art.
One of the most common places to find graffiti is, of course, in back alleys like this. And you almost expect to find some kind of rude anatomical drawing, and perhaps the names of a couple of locals made fun of by their friends. But if you think that's some kind of symptom of a sickness of modern society, think again.
In fact, some of the earliest known graffiti anywhere in the British Isles was found on a Roman stone unearthed in Hexham, Northumberland in 2022. It was inscribed more than 1,700 years ago, and shows the all-too-familiar phallic symbol, along with the phrase Secundinus cacator, which when translated is not very friendly to poor old Secundinus. Now, who he was, we might never know, but it seems clear that the intent of the carver was simply to insult the man, no more, no less. But not all ancient graffiti is so easy to interpret. After all, the word itself simply means something scratched or scribbled. The term first used in 1850 to describe the scratched inscriptions found at archaeological sites like Pompeii. But with many of these scratches being symbolic and pictorial in nature, their meanings and origins can be very difficult to pinpoint. To see it for myself, I paid a visit to St. Lawrence's Church in Ludlow, built in the 11th century as the beating heart of the medieval town, and home to a large collection of medieval graffiti.
Even before we head into the church, just here on the doorway arch, there's some fascinating ancient graffiti, and it's actually shaped like pentagrams. Are these some kinds of ritual protection symbols? Just the scribblings of a bored medieval passerby? Or are they part of the fascinating phenomena of Mason's marks?
Of course, it can be easy to forget about the men who built these magnificent churches, toiled over them for decades, even sometimes dedicating their entire lives to them. Is it any wonder that they wanted to leave their mark behind? Some kind of signature, hewn into stone to say, I was here. This godly work was wrought by my hand, to my design.
I'm inside the bell tower of St. Lawrence's Church, and I've actually had to give my contact details in order to be allowed access to this part of the church. That's because it's extremely steep up here as I climb up, and they don't want me to get into trouble and have nobody to contact. The reason I'm here is that masons' marks are often hidden high up, out of sight, on the rafters and the archways of the church. And a lot of them are actually here, inside the tower. It's very steep and very tall. Let's go have a look.
But what are masons' marks? As a type of early stone inscription, their meanings are really quite multifaceted. On one hand, they might represent a simple form of quality control, etched into finished stones, so that the individual masons who worked on them could be paid according to the work completed, as well as to aid in their actual assembly, such as numerals depicting the order the stones should be laid, or which way up they ought to face. On the other hand, these symbols might represent a literal maker's mark, an insignia to say, "I made this," like an artist signing his work. They are often quite strange, somewhat magical looking, and some have suggested similarities with early Scandinavian runes, but no link can be proved between them. In their simplest forms, they might be nothing more than a few straight lines, something like a triangle representing the mason's tools, but others are far grander and more mysterious in their meanings.
This is absolutely fascinating. This is proof that right here where I am, a mason stood and scratched his signature into this stone. This is the only thing left that says that he lived at all. I think that is absolutely wonderful. There's actually another one as well, just on the stone above, a different symbol. Check this out. Isn't that just amazing? Look at that. That is absolutely amazing. And I'll never know what it means. It almost looks like a music note. Small little signatures of the masons of whom once stood here and built this place, hidden completely from the view of the worshippers below. You can just about make out the letter B here, look. Could a name have been written there? And this here. That's just fantastic. I think this might be a mason's mark too. That kind of double triangle image here. Look at all the majesty and mystery in that symbol. And the bells are going off as well. Wow. This is well worth doing. Look at these. Another one here. That's the same one. That's the same one that I saw earlier. The same mason has carved this stone. And here's yet another one. A different symbol yet again. There's some more here, look. These are almost like big initials carved into these huge, great big stone plinths. It's tempting when looking at these symbols to think we could use them to trace the history of the individual masons. And yet there's so few records of who these men were. And the churches have been rebuilt so many times through fire, flood, or the changing fashions of religious fervour. It's not uncommon to find a 12th century mason's mark right next to a 14th century one, and even further through time. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. It's like all this mashing together of time and memory, all these epochs of which have passed us by, and just small scratchings in the stone are left there to say this moment in time happened, and the book of time closed upon it. So this is quite interesting. At the very top of the tower, after going through all of those masons' marks, there's modern graffiti here on the actual top of the tower as well. So we've like literally risen up through time. Some of this is quite interesting as well. He's letting us know he was here in 2015.
It might seem uncouth, blasphemous even, for us to leave graffiti on a historic church like this. But strangely enough, it's not as uncommon as some might imagine, with all manner of historic sites picking up over time the scars of their tourists, the unavoidable desire to record our moment of time spent there, to leave something behind, safe and secure against the ravages of time. To see this for myself, I made plans for my next destination, visible from the top of the old church tower, the ancient ruins of Ludlow Castle. Earlier that day, before arriving in Ludlow, I called into another site along the way. After all, one of the earliest forms of proto-tourist attraction were pilgrimage sites, and medieval pilgrims would often leave their own form of graffiti etched into the walls of these shrines. Graffiti crosses, prayers and memorials have been found at places of pilgrimage all over the world. And it's not just the saints either. Anything at all in these sites of which might have attracted these early tourists became like a magnet to them, inspiring the desire to leave behind some scratching, initial, or other marking etched into the stone.
This is the tomb of Black Vaughan, the site of a local ghost story. And if you look carefully, it's a wonderful tapestry of graffiti throughout the ages. Etched names and initials, and even strange symbols. Some of them actually have dates carved into them as well. Here is one from 1897, and another one here from 1898. And there's even one, if we go right round the side here, right round to the back, here, from 1782.
This desire to write on the walls has followed us through the ages, extending far from just the world of saints and churches, and into the wider range of tourist sites as a whole. In fact, during a restoration project at the Colosseum in Rome in 2012, centuries of graffiti was uncovered at the site, with inscriptions dating from the Roman period mixed together with the graffiti of 18th and 19th century tourists, for whom the visiting of ruins and historic sites was becoming increasingly popular.
Ludlow Castle was not immune to this new phenomena of tourism. It's been attracting visitors here since the 18th century, and with so many people passing by, so many of them have felt the need to leave some inscription behind. That part of human nature that just says, we want to make a record of our day spent here in these ancient ruins. Let's head down into the tower and have a look. This graffiti here is absolutely incredible. There's something from almost every period of time. Here, look, is T.H. Bowen, of whom comes from the nearby town of Kington, and left his inscription behind in 1889. There's one just here from 2001, right next to something from the 19th century, and another one just next to it from 2012. And you just know that people have sat right here and scratched these things into the wall. Some of these are very, very old indeed. There's some up here with Victorian scratchings and actual biro pen markings directly on top of the Victorian graffiti. Some more here at the top of supposedly the haunted tower. What have we got? SJR 1878. Very, very neatly inscribed, very different from today's graffiti. And there's quite a few of them, just like with the top of the church tower, wanting to tell us not just their initials or their name, but where they've come from as well. There's one here from the village of Wharton, for example, as well as just initials literally piled on top of one another, perhaps groups of people that have come by. WB, EN, and Wilkie here written really big writing. That's actually almost like a Victorian graffiti tag. And these are also similar to what we saw with the pilgrimage sites. This is a place of interest in the castle. It's supposed to be a haunted tower where somebody fell to their deaths right down there to the floor and their spirit is still seen. How many of these early taggers have just wanted to say, I was not just here at Ludlow Castle, I climbed the haunted tower as well.
We often wonder if walls could talk. What would they say? Well, these walls do, in their own kind of way. And their words are an echo of human footprints in time, names and faces who impress themselves into the fabric of the place, and into their own memories. Human shapes of who, despite the passage of years, are so similar, and yet so different from one another, coming back year after year, until they come no longer, and only their small imprint remains, like a ghost. It's worth noting, of course, that defacing the walls of Ludlow Castle, or anywhere else for that matter, is illegal, and from the Victorian period onwards, attitudes began to shift with regards to public opinion on such behaviour. Archives exist of Victorian newspapers where people are arrested for graffiti-based crimes, including chalking rude and indecent words on the outside of his walls and shutters, and caricaturing an old gentleman, to name but a few. The long arm of the law, however, was seemingly no deterrent for many, and I even saw evidence of it earlier at St. Lawrence's, with these wonderfully preserved Victorian school desks, imprinted with the graffiti scribblings of 100 bored schoolboys, of whom lived out their lives in a changing world now long lost from us, and one by one fell silently to the grave, leaving only these scribblings behind as their legacy. But there was something else happening around the Victorian period as well, of which asks an important question about graffiti, which is still being pondered about today. Imagine a market like this one at Ludlow, bustling with the thoroughfare of thousands. Amongst these crowds could be found the screever, or pavement artist, as noted in William Mayhew's famous work, London Labour and the Poor, where he describes such people as drawing in coloured chalk on the pavement, writers without hands, and readers without eyes. Such art was usually made with chalk, and depicted religious and moral scenes, the passer-by dropping a coin or two into the artist's hat, as homage to both their skill and the message of their work. Screeving was featured in the much-loved film Mary Poppins, where character Bert draws on the pavement, an image of which for many also conjures up the recollection of a little old bird woman feeding the birds. These encounters, be they a flower seller, busker, or pavement artist, are effective because of their association with serendipity, the discovery of something valuable or pleasant by chance, a fortunate discovery of which is prone to stick with us and feel somehow like things were lined up just right for us to see it, its message meant for us specifically. Thus, graffiti becomes art of which has the potential to set forth ripples in the hearts and minds of the public, even though it may last for a mere hour until the rain washes it away like the tears of the town, another day closing in time. As we move closer to the modern day and the 20th century graffiti phenomena, this question of what is vandalism and what is art becomes even more important. When Martha Cooper and Henry Chalfant captured the burgeoning graffiti movement in New York with their 1984 book Subway Art, it quickly became known as the Bible of street art, inspiring thousands to enter this new and colourful scene, of which here in the UK was often associated with the punk and skinhead subcultures of the 1970s. Here, pioneers of street art emerged from the haze of counterculture, amongst them Lee Thompson, better known as the artist Kix, and several others, of whom expressed their thoughts and feelings, the things they could not necessarily air in public, on the walls and streets as a type of canvas instead. It was a kind of language, a mirror of the subconscious joys and fears of a generation, with political and religious musings mixed with musical rivalries and artistic interpretations. By the 1980s, subway art and other such romanticisms of the New York scene, like 1983 film Wild Style, cemented the culture in the minds of a generation raised at the precipice of the new hip-hop culture. Bristol was, and still is for many, at the centre of this explosion of street art, graffiti, and the phenomena of tagging, such as those seen by popular 80s artist 3D or Robert Del Nair. The Mason's marks for a new world. Graffiti tags could be seen as the unique signature of an artist, who often took great joy in the adrenaline-fueled pursuit of leaving their mark, avoiding cameras and police, tagging a train just as it leaves the station, leaving your tag in a strange and out-of-the-way place. In this way, you might become known in the scene, recognised by other artists through your tag, of whom each have their own insignias and symbols too, something unique to them, spread over the city like a silent voice in a crowd of millions. It's all illegal, of course, and still considered vandalism in the eyes of the law. In fact, the 1980s saw large police operations tackling this new explosion of graffiti, such as Operation Anderson, where the homes of 72 graffiti artists were raided, and arrests made, including that of John Nation, a youth worker at the Barton Hill Youth Group, a place known as the Dugout, where so many of Bristol's artists got started, gained reputations, and found inspiration. These police stings, however, did not dampen the enthusiasm for the graffiti movement, and artists continued to flock to places like Barton Hill, amongst them famous names like Nick Walker, and even the artist known as Banksy, of whom would later take street art to whole new levels of recognition, taking it to places it had never been before, and using it, as it always has been at its core, as a medium of message, protest, and cultural consciousness. But while the appeal of tagging and the sensory rush of this short-burst excitement is easy to understand, the effects of other kind of street art are far stranger, more cerebral and subtle. I set out for my next destination.
I'm on my way to the summit of Titterstone Clee, a wild hilltop that I could actually see from the top of Ludlow Castle Tower earlier. This is an isolated and unfriendly place. It's actually one of the strangest places I've ever been. It's so windswept and wild, it feels almost like you're entering an alien landscape. Anyway, there's some industrial ruins up here. Ruins from when stone used to be quarried in the area. And there's some graffiti in these ruins. And it's very, very interesting. And also, very strange. Right, it's very, very windy here. So what I'm going to do is actually hike down this hill here and try and get inside some of these ruins. It actually looks like there's been somebody living up here, look. Old bits of sleeping bags, bottles, bits of old fires. Right up here, on the top of the hill, in the middle of nowhere.
In the city, these artworks might appear like a glimpse at our shadow, of the subconscious voices of the silhouettes that pass by in a hypnotic murmuring of daily life. Who creates these things we might never know, but they transcend the tags and the jokes and the numbers scrawled on the bathroom stall. Perhaps it really is all serendipity, albeit a sometimes grotesque and challenging version of it. After all, some cities have even been planned as to deliberately invoke the possibility of such chance encounters and the meanings they give us. For example, Danish architect Jan Gehl believes serendipity is an important aspect of life in the city, and that cities should be designed with the crossroads and plazas intersecting especially to encourage this phenomena. And so, in these liminal spaces where people pass by, we are challenged by art of which silently speaks like the song of the city itself, as if the dust and dreams of thousands have formed themselves into the shapes of our lives, sometimes tragic, other times beautiful.
Up here in these hills, there's no serendipity like we had in the city. There is only the bleakness of the windswept hills and these brutal ruins of an industrial past now long forgotten. This place also has something of a reputation. There's a lot of ghosts, devils and demons here, and it's said that witches meet here on a night to worship strange things by the light of the moon. It also means that when we find the graffiti here, the noise of the city is muted, and we can come face to face with the graffiti without any form of distraction. No chance of anybody coming out from behind a corner and asking what we're doing. We can enter almost a state of meditation with it. Ask ourselves who painted these things, and what really do they mean?
There is no doubt that there can be something threatening and eerie about these works of art. The artist's brush and canvas being released from the constraints of the gallery, unaffected by morals and pleasantries, above and beyond the shackles of polite society. This art is free to twist and contort itself in any way the artist wants, guided by the deep-seated emotions of the hidden mind. These are the things of which haunt the unconscious, that children see lurking under the shadows of their beds. This graffiti, then, is art at its most raw and vulnerable. Art without makeup, a mirror of the mind. Back down below, in the city streets of today, street art has become a tourist attraction in itself. It celebrates the history and culture of a place. It's raw and real, even spiritual. And today, you can, if you wish, go to places like Bristol and embark on a guided tour led by famous names from the heyday of the scene. Their old haunts now places of interest to the modern urban historian and art critic alike. For many, finding these pieces is their first induction into the world of art. And since it has less barriers and formalities than traditional works, it can be the first type of art to mean something to us as well. And anybody could be the artist. Not just the expected youth, but your dentist or doctor, your neighbour. They could all be out there throwing up tags in the secrecy of night, donning a kind of alter ego where they become, for a brief moment, the embodiment of their art. And there are also places where graffiti is legal. So-called legal walls where any member of the public can leave their tag without fear of breaking any laws. The first of these walls was formed in Stockholm in 1968 with the Klotterplanket, or scribble board, an area that was washed clean every morning by a council official. Some, however, view legal walls as a kind of soulless compromise. If they are legally allowed, after all, watched over by some grinning civil servant, then they are not really graffiti at all. The rush, the spirit, it's gone. Even so, legal walls can be found in the UK, most likely in skate parks, industrial estates, and places like the Leek Street Tunnel in London, where the city wears our countless slogans and artworks like a tattoo imprinted into stone. And of course, should you be lucky enough to find artwork from somebody like Banksy on the side of your property, you could find your estate value rising significantly, being now the site of a public piece of art. But how does this translate to small towns? Places without the glamour of personas like Banksy, or the armies of artists like seen in Bristol or Leek Street. I travelled to my next and final destination on this journey, the small town of Leominster, about 15 miles south from the strange world of Clee Hill. It's an ancient and crooked town, once famous for the export of wool, and it wasn't hard to find the usual array of tags and scribblings hidden in the alleyways. But Leominster also used street art to brighten up its fading streets, bringing colour and visual beauty to the old town. Walls which would otherwise be grey and uninteresting have found themselves transformed into scenes celebrating the rural landscape of the town, the roots of trees as ancient as the farms and valleys that surround it. There was also a big focus on sheep, a nod to the history of the place, with various lambs peeking out from alleyways, street sides, and corners. This alleyway also had its own form of street art, commissioned paintings of which now hang in frames and represent the various ages of the quiet town. And then there were the yarn bombers. These new graffiti artists, more grandma than gangster. They're not armed with spray paint and stencils either, but instead balls of wool. Taking off all over the UK, so-called yarn bombing is a friendly and fun version of creating street art, with armies of knitters descending overnight to dress lampposts, doorways, and postboxes with all manner of cute creations. It's hard not to enjoy this crafty form of the street art phenomena. It might be a world away from the hip-hop culture of the 1980s, but it's a safe and non-invasive form of bringing art to small towns all across the UK, and for somewhere like Leominster, it really works. Before leaving town, I paid a visit to another area where street art could be found. These boards placed in the town's railway station, where passers-by have left names, shapes, and handprints behind. A multicoloured tapestry of travel, and the desire, just like with those early medieval scribblers, of wanting to leave something behind to say we were here, before we board the train and journey onwards, perhaps never to walk these ways again. It made me think about the permanence and impermanence of these works. The screever's work would last for merely hours, like a sandcastle awaiting the coming tide, and tags may be washed away with a council-approved paint job, viewing them as no more important than a child writing on the wall in crayons. New innovations may come and go. Graffiti with QR codes or VR, AR, and AI, all claiming to bring new blood to an ancient world. But they are not permanent either, lasting only as long as their server allows. A world of which is here today, but has no guarantee of tomorrow. Oddly enough though, graffiti can be permanent, at least relatively so, lasting far longer than we do, or any of our fads, empires, or cities. Just look at those most ancient scribblings on the walls, and they are a testament to the power of this art form, reflecting the spirit of why we still create these tags and street art, and likely always will. Those small scratchings are now all that exists to say that once, in some dim-remembered day of where no memory now stirs, I was there, standing right where you are, etching my name forever into the stone.